Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
The TRE Bookshow is sponsored by audible.co.uk. Download one title each month, plus unlimited listening to thousands of Audible originals, podcasts and audiobooks. Just click on the Audible banner at www.tre.radio.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's book show. We start by looking at the bestseller lists on Amazon.co.uk and the Sunday Times, the oldest and most influential book sales chart in the UK. Then we'll be chatting to Peter Brown. He's an author and illustrator of children's books. His titles include various New York Times bestsellers. His latest, The Wild Robot on the Island, brings to full colour the adventures of the #1 novel, The Wild Robot, which is now a DreamWorks major motion picture, with numerous award nominations, including the Oscars and the BAFTAs. Filled with Peter's stunning artwork, his latest is a moving picture book and the perfect gift for longtime fans of the series that sparked a global phenomenon. It touches on important themes of caring for the environment, motherhood and technology. We're also chatting to Lyn Asquith, who always dreamed of being an author. Now a retired human resources officer, she's fulfilling that wish. She spent her childhood holidays in Essex, the nostalgic setting for her debut novel, Time to Fly, which was inspired by her own thoughts of what she would do if she won the lottery. We're joined by Jenny L. Spohr, who has studied the trials and tribulations of royals since Princess Diana took that long walk to the altar. Her best-selling historical Renaissance romance series, The Realm, has received rave reviews. She made the innovative decision to write 2 spice-level editions of her series so readers could pick their preference without losing the swoon and intrigue. Heirs and Spares is book 1 in the series, set in the 16th century, when Elizabeth I sits on the English throne. That's just the first hour. In the second hour, we're chatting to Anne Morgan, Roger Kiyoko and Caroline McGee.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good evening. We will start by looking at the Sunday Times bestseller list, the oldest and most influential book sales chart in the UK, and the one that every author wants to be on. So this chart is the most accurate and comprehensive estimation of book sales in the country. Here's quite an unusual thing. The top 8 books in the hardback fiction chart are by men. I wonder if they've finally put an end to female-skewed romanticy's great dominance. We shall see. I doubt it, probably. The final volume in Philip Pullman's Book of Dust trilogy has shot straight to #1, selling nearly 50,000 copies. The previous instalment, The Secret Commonwealth, spent 18 weeks in the chart. So looking at general hardbacks, there are 3 new entries this week. At #1, Always Remember by Charlie Mackesy. #2 is Nobody's Girl by Virginia Roberts Gouffre. #3 is a new entry, A Mind of My Own by Kathy Burke, the comedian and actress on doing things her own way from childhood to now. #4 is another new entry called This Way Up by Map Men, a look at some of the world's worst maps and how and why they were created. #5, Diddley Squat, The Farmer's Dog by Jeremy Clarkson. #6, Driven by Susie Wolfe. #7 is Entitled by Andrew Lowney. #8 is the other new entry, Woke is Dead by Piers Morgan, the broadcaster on what he describes as woke culture, its rise and collapse. #9, When Gavin Met Stacey and Everything in Between by Ruth Jones and James Corden. And #10, The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Looking at fiction hardbacks, there are 6 new entries from last week. Number 1, including The Rose Field by Philip Pullman. Lyra and Malcolm's quests converge. It's the final book in the Book of Dust trilogy. Number 2 this week, The Impossible Fortune by Richard Osman. Number 3, The Hawk is Dead by Peter James. Number 4, a new entry from Bernard Cornwell, Sharp Storm. As war with Napoleon rages, Major Sharp prepares for his toughest winter yet. Number 5, The Secret of Secrets by Dan Brown. Number 6, a new entry by John Grisham called The Widow. A small-town lawyer hooks a wealthy client only to find himself on trial for murder. Number 7 is The Long Shoe by Bob Mortimer. Number 8, a new entry by Michael Connolly called The Proving Ground. Mickey Haller takes on a case against an artificial intelligence company. Number 9, a new entry by Tasha Suri, The Isle in the Silver Sea. A witch of the woods and a knight seek to defy fate and save their doomed love. And number 10 is a new entry by Reese Witherspoon and Harlan Coben. Yes, they've teamed up to create Gone Before Goodbye. An ex-army surgeon is hired by a mysterious client. And moving on to Amazon.co.uk, still at number 1 is Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice by Virginia Roberts Gouffre. Number 2, Always Remember, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, the Horse and the Storm by Charlie Mackesy. Number 3, A Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Party Pooper, book 20 in the series by Jeff Kinney. Number 4, Mary 90. Mary Berry shares her very best recipes from the brand new BBC series celebrating her 90th birthday. Number 5, The Impossible Fortune by Richard Osman. Number 6, Minecraft Joke Book by Mojang AB. Number 7, The Rose Field, book 3 in the Book of Dust series by Philip Pullman. Number 8, The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. Number 9, entitled The Full Story of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's Fall by Andrew Lowney. And number 10, A Mind of My Own by Kathy Burke.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
You're listening to the Book Club on Talk Radio Europe. And keep listening. That's an instruction from Margaret Thatcher.
Joining us on the line now is Peter Brown. He's an author and illustrator of children's books. His titles include New York Times bestsellers The Wild Robot, The Curious Garden, Children Make Terrible Pets, and Mr. Tiger Goes Wild. He's with us on the book show to talk about his new book, The Wild Robot on the Island. It brings to full colour the adventures of the #1 New York Times best-selling novel The Wild Robot, which is now a DreamWorks major motion picture, with numerous award nominations, including the Oscars and the BAFTAs. Filled with Peter's stunning artwork, The Wild Robot on the Island is a moving picture book and the perfect gift for longtime fans of the series that sparked a global phenomenon. It touches on important themes of caring for the environment, motherhood, and technology. Welcome to the book show, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. So tell us about the Wild Robot, first of all, and how it became the Wild Robot on the Island.
Years ago, I was drawing in my sketchbook. I'm an illustrator, author and illustrator. I went to art school and studied illustration. So I spent a lot of my time drawing just for fun. And one day I drew a picture of a robot in a tree. Kind of like how when I was a child, I used to climb trees, and here was this drawing I made of a robot climbing a tree. And there's just something sweet about it and mysterious about it. And I just could not stop thinking about this robot and what life would be like in a forest or in the wilderness for a robotic character. And so that kind of sent me down this whole rabbit hole of doing research on robotics and artificial intelligence. And on the natural world, I was studying animal behavior, things like that, and finding all sorts of interesting connections between nature and kind of robotics and computers. And that led me to create this story about a robot named Roz, who finds herself stranded in the wilderness. And in order to survive, studies the animals, learns how to communicate with them, and develops relationships with them, including adopting an orphaned gosling who becomes her son. And so this story ends up having a lot more relatability than you might have expected with a title like The Wild Robot. It ends up being about family and community and fitting in. And so that novel, The Wild Robot, there are some illustrations throughout the novel, but it's really about the words. And I thought it would be interesting, instead of using words to describe to readers how Roz becomes the wild robot, if I were to show them with big, vivid, colorful, detailed illustrations, show them how Roz becomes the wild robot. And so that's kind of why I decided to adapt the original novel into this new picture book, which is called The Wild Robot on the Island.
Oh, nice. So it must have been lovely for you to kind of bring it to life.
Absolutely. I love these characters in this world. The first novel led to a second one, which led to a third one. So there's now a trilogy of Wild Robot novels. And I never get tired of thinking about Roz and her friends in this world and imagining how she would find her way out of these tricky situations. There's a lot of complexity to the world where she lives, and there's a lot of moral dilemmas that she faces. And it's really fascinating to imagine how this character would get through these difficult moments. So spending more time in that world was a dream, and being able to use my illustration background and really vividly show readers all the little details in full color that I was seeing originally when I wrote that first novel. I was seeing scenes in my mind in full, vivid color, but because of publishing, the interior illustrations of the original books are not in color, which is true of most illustrated novels. And so, yeah, it was really a fun project for me to kind of revisit that world.
Yeah, and it's funny why it should be so different and new and unique, but it is the idea of seeing a robot in the forest, in the woods, at one with nature, because you don't normally see those two worlds collide, do you?
No, not at all. That was what was so exciting to me about the idea, was imagining how a robot would gradually kind of evolve in front of our eyes from what we might expect a robot to look and sound like, this kind of stiff robotic movements and stiff way of talking, to gradually, step by step, becoming part of the wilderness in a way I don't even think a human could. Roz has this computer brain. She remembers every detail perfectly, and she's got this incredible vision, and she ends up observing the wilderness more closely than any person ever could, and learns lessons that I think no person ever could as a result of that. Understands the animals in such great detail that all their little noises and movements begin to make sense to her. And so she learns to communicate with them. And then her having relationships with animals was like so fascinating to imagine. All the conversations I wish I could have with animals, but I can't. And I could sort of imagine them through my character, Roz.
Yeah. So she has a huge advantage being a robot then in the woods.
Yeah. Ironically, it ends up actually, her robotic nature is what allows her to become more in tune with the natural world than I think a person could.
Yeah. And why did you make your robot female?
At first, in the original draft of the story, Roz was not a female. It was Roz was an it. And I would have sentences in the story like, Roz walked into the forest and then it climbed a tree. And that was really hard to connect with a character who was an it. I was finding that difficult. And so, the English language only gives us so many options. Roz either had to be an it or a he or a she. I had to pick. It wasn't going to work, so it was either he or she. And when I thought about the relationships that she was going to have with these different animals, her attitude towards them, the way that they saw her, I decided to try her out as a she. and as soon as I did that, it really worked. A lot of the loose ends in the story kind of tightened up and things just flowed smoothly. And I knew pretty quickly that making Roz a she was the right decision. Plus, as a fan of science fiction, there's a handful of female robots throughout stories and films, and Mostly, though, we think of robots as being masculine for some reason. And I thought, why not have another female robot in the world, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And these stories, I bet, have gone down well with your own family. I know you've been reading aloud to your son.
Well, my son's actually a little too young. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We're probably almost at the picture book phase, but he's about 2 years old. So we're getting there. But the rest of my family, of course, is thrilled with the success of the books and the movie and everything.
And tell us about the movie. How did that come about?
Well, it was funny because DreamWorks, the animation studio, contacted me before I had even finished writing the book. They'd heard through the grapevine, people talk and film people know publishing people. And I'm not exactly sure how it came to their attention, but somebody at DreamWorks heard that Peter Brown was writing this book about a robot in the wilderness. And so they reached out before I had even finished it. They wanted to see an unfinished version of the story, but I refused and said, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait until I feel really good about this story." I didn't want to ruin this opportunity. It felt like an amazing opportunity to have that kind of interest from such a big, reputable animation studio. So I eventually finished writing it, and then immediately sent them over the manuscript, and they made me an offer to adapt it into a film long before the book was even in stores. So they were just really excited about this idea. And eventually, it took them a while, but they eventually landed Chris Sanders as the director of the film, who's kind of a legend in the animation world. And then he and his team started working on the adaptation, the film adaptation. So I was never in the studio working on the film. People assume that I was incredibly involved in the making of the movie, but I wasn't. I don't live anywhere near Los Angeles, and I figured I'm not a filmmaker. I'll let the professionals handle that. But we had a lot of conversations over the 4 years it took them to make the movie. We would get on a Zoom call, and they would ask me all sorts of questions about the research that I had done and the decisions that I had made, and they gradually started showing me the artwork that their team of artists was coming up with, the character designs, things like that. So it was pretty cool to see a really up close look at the making of a feature animated film. And it happened to be based on my book, which of course was really exciting. Oh, I bet. And the fact that they involved you during the process, so you were seeing it come to life, it must have been really exciting. Yeah, it was. And the truth is that before I got my first book deal 20 years ago, I actually worked in the animation business a little bit. I painted backgrounds in a couple seasons of an animated television show. And so I have a even greater appreciation for animation than probably the average person. And yeah, it was just a dream come true to see this incredible team of talented artists and designers and animators pouring their hearts and souls into this film was, I couldn't have asked for anything more. Yeah. And when you're doing a book like this, the fact that you're doing the words and the illustration, I presume you write the words first and then illustrate it, or not necessarily? I've spent years writing and illustrating picture books, which are surprisingly different than an illustrated novel. They both have words and they both have pictures, but the process is really different. At least it is for me. So yes, you're correct. When I was writing the Wild Robot novels, I focused on the words first because I knew there would be a lot of editing and revising, and I didn't want to invest a whole lot of time in planning or illustrating a scene that I was going to end up cutting from the story eventually. So in the case of the novel, I had the story almost finished before I really started diving into the artwork. For the picture books, for most picture books anyway, it's a much more confusing and complicated process of kind of bouncing back and forth between the words and the illustrations. And, a drawing might change how I want to write a sentence, and then a different sentence might require me to go back and revise a sketch or an illustration. And so there's a lot of back and forth on picture books. And for the Wild Robot on the Island, it was a little different because I had the story so well figured out ahead of time. The real challenge was because I had to condense it and simplify it quite a bit. The real challenge for the Wild Robot on the Island was figuring out what are the most important moments from Roz's life and how can I string those together in a way that really makes sense and really works as a picture book. I didn't want to just make this picture book for the sake of making it. I wanted it to work. I wanted it to be a strong picture book in its own right. And so at first I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I experimented and I, tried out different writings and different sketches and played around with this visual storytelling, and eventually kind of figured out how to retell Roz's origin story in a simpler, more visual way.
Yeah. And so it's really a collaborative effort then between you as an author and you as an illustrator. Yeah,
that's a nice way of putting it. Occasionally I'll illustrate books for other authors, and, so I'm familiar with how that works. And typically that works at like the author will finish the manuscript, or at least get it 95% finished before I ever see it. And then I go about sketching it out and planning all the illustrations, and then maybe they'll adjust the text a little bit, and then I move on to the final artwork. And so, yeah, in this case, it really was kind of like I was two separate people. I was focused on the words for part of the process, and then focused on the illustrations for the part of the process. It wasn't quite as organic as some of the other picture books I've written and illustrated myself. It was a slightly unique process, but that made it interesting. Having been doing this kind of thing for 20 years, it was fun to try something new. Yeah.
So is that it from Roz, or could we have more about her in the future?
I'm not sure about picture books, but I am going to write another Wild Robot novel. So there's currently 3. The first one is The Wild Robot. The second one is called The Wild Robot Escapes. The third one is called The Wild Robot Protects. And I'm just about to begin work on the fourth one, which doesn't actually have a title yet. But and these things take time. So who knows? Even if I had a title at this stage, it might change by the time I finish writing it. But I have an idea. I have the story kind of mapped out in my mind. But I have to do some research and a lot of planning and thinking, and of course tons of writing and some illustrating. So it's going to take a little while, but someday there will be a fourth Wild Robot novel. Yeah.
Great. Exciting. Well, in the meantime, if listeners want to get a copy of The Wild Robot on the Island, it's available now on our website, TRE.radio, and it's written and illustrated by Peter Brown, who we've been chatting with today. Peter, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Lyn Asquith, who always dreamt of being an author. Now a retired human resources officer, she's fulfilling that wish. Born in Hertfordshire, she spent her childhood holidays in Essex, the nostalgic settings for her debut novel, Time to Fly. The book follows Helen Pond, who wins more than £18 million in the lottery and grapples with how to use it. Welcome to the book show, Lyn.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Must be very exciting having your debut novel out.
Oh, it's been a long time coming.
Were you working on it for a while?
It's taken 4 years in total. So it has been a while. I was going to self-publish last year, but then I was lucky enough to be put in touch with an agent who had faith in the book and managed to get a book deal with the Book Guild.
Oh, fantastic. Well, yeah, it's a great subject. I think it's something that most people have discussed. What would you do if you won the lottery?
Exactly. For me, I often thought about it, and the inspiration actually came from me coming down the stairs and thinking about buying a midweek ticket for the rollover because it was a particularly big one. And I began to imagine what I would do with the money if I won. And the typical things came out, like help family, friends, perhaps some local community groups. But then I thought about the pitfalls of winning. And that's when it really hit me that this wouldn't be so easy if I wanted to keep my anonymity, which is what I would prefer to do. And also how family and friends would react, because would they expect to share, and what would be a suitable amount? Would the money actually solve any problems that they had, and would they want some more money later? And if you want to remain anonymous, how do you give them money without actually telling them where the money's come from?
Oh, definitely. There are so many questions and possible complications, aren't there? I've thought about that a lot in terms of giving money to friends and family. You know, if you won 20 million on the lottery and you gave some friends $1,000, they might think, $1,000? She's just won 20 million.
Exactly.
But others might say, oh my goodness, you don't need to give me anything. That's so kind of you. You know, it's really, really, and family as well, you know, 10 grand, 20 grand. Is that it? I mean, it's awful, isn't it? A horrible thought.
It is a difficult one. And I mean, if you want to stay anonymous, obviously it's the impact it has on you as well, because you could feel isolated, guilty about the secret that you're holding from your loved ones. It's more difficult for you to quietly spend the money. And so it's a very difficult situation to be in if you do want to remain anonymous. And if you do accept publicity, you've then got the problem of, are people being friends with me because they genuinely like my company, or is it because I've come into money? So it's a real difficult one.
Yeah, definitely. Has it made you think that maybe you don't want to win the lottery?
Well, it's definitely highlighted the difficulties for me, and a couple of people who've read the book have said, "Oh, well, I really don't know if I would want to win the lottery now," and I think that's what the book tends to explore. Is money really the answer to everything? And I think obviously we realise that that's not necessarily the answer.
Yeah.
To actually, to all of life's problems, which is one of the things that Helen explores in the book herself.
Yeah, interesting. So tell us about the character of Helen and what happens to her.
Well, Helen, as you mentioned, wins the lottery. She wants to keep her identity a secret. And she's wondering what to do with her newfound wealth. So she turns, as she always does, to her best friend, Anna, who she's known for years and years. And Anna, unfortunately, is battling cancer. Fortunately for Helen, she is supported by the lottery team. She has a financial advisor and a life coach who can help her navigate things, but things do become quite complicated when she actually falls for one of the lottery advisors, because that obviously adds another dynamic to the relationship. And there's also a very nasty, ruthless journalist who obviously knows somebody has won this huge amount of money, and he's absolutely desperate to find out who's won. So there's lots of twists and turns. I think there's aspects to the book that people will find will make them laugh, cry. The characters, I think, are fairly relatable but multi-dimensional. There's a bit of tension, a bit of excitement, and it explores Helen's sort of vulnerabilities, her fears, her desires, and explores friendships and relationships. So I think there's quite a lot to actually get from the book.
Yeah, so you get to know not just Helen, but her backstory and other people in her life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do different people have different points of view, or does she only share it with Anna?
She shares it with Anna. She shares it, well, obviously the lottery advisors know, but she really is trying her best to keep it under wraps, because she knows that there's potential difficulties if people tend to know that she's come into some money. So, I mean, it's like anything. There's immediate things I would think about if I won the lottery. Perhaps I'd move into a bigger house. I'd go on a few more holidays. But, you know, it's such a difficult situation when you've got to try and think about everything you do with the money if you do want that anonymity.
Yeah, definitely. And people are nosy intrinsically. People start to ask questions. You know, if you haven't gone on a holiday for a few years and then you suddenly do 2 in 6 months, you know, your nearest and dearest will be like, how come you can afford to go on? Where's this money come from? People would just ask and be nosy, as opposed to saying, oh, good for you, enjoy your holiday. Everyone would have lots of questions as if it's any of their business, you know. That would just happen, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And Helen is a very open person, so she struggles a great deal to actually keep the winning a secret, but she knows that for her own peace of mind, that's what she needs to do. I mean, to keep it from, she's got a brother, and to keep it from her close family is quite difficult, but she knows that her younger brother, Sam, would actually tell people if, and she wants to give him money. So she's had to find a way of actually doing that without actually giving the money to him directly. So there's a lot of things that have to be done in a very sort of confidential and secretive way for her to achieve what she wants to with the money.
Yeah, clever. And was it fun coming up with all the different scenarios and obviously relating it back to yourself, thinking about what you'd do in that situation?
Oh, exactly. I mean, a lot of people have said to me that there's a lot of Helen's traits that are very much mine, people that have known me for a while. But it's been a real interesting exercise really for me, because what I wanted to try and do as both a writer and a reader is make the characters as strong as I could and a very believable storyline. So it was great for me because I became completely immersed in the book and the story. And even for me writing it, I was thinking, oh, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? So for me, I was really pleased that I felt that way, because it made me feel that this was a good story to actually get out there. And there's not that many books, not fiction books anyway, there's not many books about winning the lottery at all, which I was surprised to find out.
Yeah, definitely, because it must be a conversation that pretty much everyone has had. You know, it's a great dinner party conversation, or a great thing to discuss with your partner or your parents or your siblings or your friends. You know, what would you do? And it's really interesting, everyone's different perspectives on it. You know, a lot of people automatically go, charity, I'd give a lot to the dog's home and things like that. And other people say, I want to buy my parents' house and I'd want to, you know, get a bigger car, or, you know, it's really, really interesting what people say, and none of it's right or wrong. It's just personal choice and circumstance, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But there's even rules about giving money to charity. They have to be aware for tax purposes that they need to know where the money's coming from. So again, how much information do you give to enable you still to keep that anonymity? So it's been interesting doing a lot of research on areas like that, because you just think, oh, well, I'll give money to charity. And Helen actually, without giving too much away, she does actually make a little bit of a mistake in haste. And that's the thing, you know, you've got to constantly be on the ball, constantly thinking about, I can't do this. I need to think about, if I want to do this, I need to think about that, you know. So there's lots of things that you wouldn't necessarily in your day-to-day life think about. So it's been really interesting looking into all the aspects of the book.
Yeah, it would be so easy to make a knee-jerk reaction and get a group of close friends together, or family, or both, and say, just want to take you guys all out for dinner. But of course, that wouldn't be a normal thing to do for most people. So again, everybody would say, what? You won the lottery or something? You know, it would be so hard to just start treating people if you hadn't done that before.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, has it made you want to write more, Lyn? Is this the first of many?
Oh, I've always enjoyed writing, but had to stop with work and family and other commitments. And so when I had the inspiration for this book, and finished it, it just really gave me a drive to want to do other stories. So I'm working on 2 books at the moment. Another novel not connected to this, connected to Time to Fly, and also a book of short stories, which have all got a twist at the end, a little bit of karma. So that's really exciting. I've managed to develop things that I never thought I'd do, into radio interviews, podcasts, a website. I've now got my own website, lynasquith.com. So there's lots. Everything is just so exciting, and I just can't wait to do more. I just love it. It's great.
Oh, good for you. So it feels like a real new chapter in your life, literally.
Exactly. And at 62, for me, it's like, well, this is my time. And if ever anybody was thinking, well, I've hit my 50s or my 60s, now I've sort of done everything, but I would still like to do things. It's really a good time for you to be thinking, well, don't just wish I'd done things, just get stuck in and do whatever you've always had a dream to do.
Oh, definitely. It's your time to fly.
Exactly.
And I wanted to ask you about it because it's a lovely title. Where does it sort of come from? How did you come up with it?
I didn't come up with a title until I finished the book. And if people read the book, they'll actually discover where the title has come from.
Okay.
That was the last thing I actually managed to achieve was the book title.
Nice. And what about the setting? Whereabouts in Essex is it set?
When I was young, I used to go to Clacton in Essex with my family, and I'd still go down for day trips. It's always had a very special place in my heart. So the book is actually split between Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, where I've lived, and Clacton. And it's been interesting going back about 3 years ago. One of my favourite little fish and chip shops along the pier, by the pier, had actually closed, and it had been replaced by a cafe. And I was quite upset at first. But my mum and I went into the cafe for a cup of tea and a piece of cake, and I was just amazed. It turned into this really quirky cafe with sort of a 20s, 30s type of feel, lots of weird paintings. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to use this in the book. So that now is in the book.
Oh, lovely. Sounds great. Well, if people want to get a copy of Time to Fly, it's available now on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Lyn Asquith, who we've been chatting with. Lyn, thank you so much for joining us, and well done you.
Oh, thank you so much for your time.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Jenny L. Spohr. She has studied the trials and tribulations of royals since Princess Diana took that long walk to the altar. Her best-selling historical Renaissance romance series, The Realm, including Heirs and Spares, God and King, Crown and Thorns, and Sword and Shield, has received rave reviews and rankings. She made the innovative decision to write 2 spice-level editions of her series so readers could pick their preference without losing any of the swoon and intrigue. She brings an informed perspective to the 16th century, having focused on the Reformation and the Tudors during her master's degree. She's with us on the book show to talk about Heirs and Spares, which is book 1 in the Realm series. Welcome to the book show, Jenny.
Oh, thanks so much, Hannah. I'm just overjoyed to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. And what a brilliant idea, having 2 spice levels. I mean, was that hard work, having to sort of write the book in 2 different versions?
It was, but it was also fun. So it was definitely hard to change some scenes and add, I had to add sort of brush strokes of things throughout the entire book, just changing different adjectives here, or a way someone looked at someone differently and things like that. But it was a lot of fun to do, actually, because I'd always wanted to kind of have that higher spice level in it, but the market wasn't really demanding that type of book back when I first wrote the series. So it was actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, interesting. And have you been able to track over the years then which one does better?
Yeah, well, it tends to be now the spicy one is I still do get requests, when I reviewers or just folks that want a copy and ask which one they want. There still are plenty that want what we call the closed bed curtains edition for the less spicy one.
Oh, brilliant! And what do you write first?
So I wrote the closed bed curtains edition first. In fact, a couple of years before I wrote the Betwixt the Sheets edition, which is the spicy one. So the idea came to add that spicy aspect a little bit later as the market sort of changed. And frankly, as I got a little bit older and more comfortable as a writer.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I suppose you do need to be really comfortable to write spicy sex scenes, don't you?
Yes, especially knowing that your friends and your relatives are going to be reading it.
Yes, I guess you just don't talk about it.
Yeah, no.
Fair enough. So let's look at Heirs and Spares then. Tell us when it's set and the characters involved.
Yeah, so it's set in 1569 in Europe, and it's basically I made up a fake country because I wanted to write about this royal couple in the midst of the bloody chaos of the Reformation. And so I made up a tiny little Catholic country that's just north of France and on the coast there. And that's, so they're sort of surrounded by those politics of you've got the Germanic states, becoming Protestant. And then you've got England offshore there. So they've got a lot of external pressure. And I wanted to see how this reluctant king and reluctant queen navigated those politics outside their kingdom, but also the politics within their own court in the midst of falling in love.
Yeah. And when you're making up a country and characters, obviously, do you feel like you can really say what you want, or are you tied into all the research and knowledge that you have from this period to try and make it as realistic as possible?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, I drew, of course, a ton from that time period because I was trying to make it seem, I wanted it to feel like if you were a reader, you wanted to go back and look on a map of Europe at that time and be like, wait, where is this country? Wanted people to think they maybe have forgotten about this little country. So I did want to make it as realistic as possible, but also have fun with it. And so, for example, the queen, the character Annalore, I took different characteristics from Henry VIII's wives, his 6 wives, and sort of made a amalgamation of all of them into her as a character. That was a lot of fun. So I got to play with it that way. And then it's also what's interesting in historical fiction is that sometimes when you stick so closely to history, it's not believable to a modern audience. So there are some things, and in fact, what's funny is a lot of times others of my colleagues who are historical writers will say, yeah, the complaints I get from readers or reviews will be like, this wasn't right because this and this and that. They'll be like, oh no, that was the most historical part of that scene or whatnot, So there's a little bit of that balance of taking history and then making it not only palatable, but believable to a modern reader.
Yeah, because people don't want to feel like they're reading a history book or getting a history lesson, do they?
No, especially when you're going to a, historical fiction, right? And especially historical romance. There's a lot of, that plays into it a little bit of the spicy scenes as well. There are some things that were very taboo back then that are not taboo now. And readers want to read that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it makes it extra spicy when you're reading about them doing things that you think, oh my goodness, surely they didn't do that back then.
Right, exactly.
Are you quite disciplined with your writing? Do you have certain times of day when you want to write and a structured way of doing it?
Oh my gosh, that is another good question. I am a mom, and so I write when I can fit it in. I am jealous of writers who can just say, yes, I get my coffee, and every morning at 8 a.m. I open my computer and I just write. I shove it in, between sports classes and doctor's appointments and working on homework and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes the writing muse, as they say, hits me, and I kind of have to shove all of that aside, and dinner is ordered out, takeaway and those sorts of things.
Yeah. You're human, basically.
Yes.
And what about the planning side of things? When you started with this book one in the series, had you planned from the start that it was going to be a series?
Well, it kind of came to me, speaking of being a mom, it kind of came to me in the middle of the night in those early years when my kids were really young, and I was feeding them in the middle of the night and things like that. And I just, these visions, different scenes just kind of sort of came to my head in the middle of the night, and I just started writing them down. So when I started, it was more of an exercise for myself of, oh, this is fun. This is interesting. Who are these people? And why does this, king not want to be married or be a king? And why does this queen not, what woman on earth wouldn't want to be a queen, right? Why does this woman not want to be here? And I just started digging down into these people that basically appeared into my head. And the series was birthed from that. There is a bit of, sort of these very important plot points that came to me as I was writing that needed to happen. And I knew those setting out to write, but otherwise it was sort of stringing those big plot points together. Like I knew there was going to be a civil war, and I knew there was going to be some other countries were going to want to take over and things like that. So I knew those larger points. But yeah, it was fun to do the individual threading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you tell us who the heirs and spares are in the book, or is that giving too much away?
No. Well, the king in the book, William, is actually the second son. So he's the spare, and he was exiled by his elder brother. His elder brother was not a nice guy. And so he never thought he was going to be king, and never really wanted to be, just because of how sort of horrid his brother and his father were. And then when his brother mysteriously dies, he's brought back, to run the thing. And all his counselors say, well, you got to get married, and you need heirs and spares of your own, as fast as possible to kind of secure the line. There's nobody after you except your cousin, who everybody thinks is dastardly. So that's where the heirs and the spares come along. And then, of course, there's pressure for the Queen, Anna, to write. Her purpose is to give the king and the kingdom heirs and spares, boys and girls. And of course, you want the boys as your children, but you also want girls to marry off to other princes, right? So you have a daughter, you're going to marry her to the Dauphin of France, and that's going to be better for you. So you want as many as possible. And so that's her struggle, is being sort of not wanting to be married to this guy anyway, and then feeling like, wait, I've got a brain, and all you people want me to do is just birth children. So she's got that struggle as well.
It's funny hearing you talk about that. It sounds so odd, but yet this is still happening today in royal families around the world. It's just as relevant now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's part of what I love about historical fiction, is that human nature doesn't change, right? It's just the context changes, but our human nature stays the same.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get a copy of Heirs and Spares, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's book 1 in the Realm series, and it's by Jenny Spohr, who we've been chatting with. Jenny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray. Talk Radio Europe. The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Welcome to the second hour of tonight's book show. In the first hour, we were chatting with Peter Brown, Lyn Asquith and Jenny L. Spohr. In this hour, we're joined by Anne Morgan, an author, speaker and editor. In 2012, she set herself a challenge of reading a book from every country in a year, a project that led to a TED Talk and to the non-fiction book Reading the World, How I Read a Book from Every Country. Her new book, Relearning to Read, Adventures in Not Knowing, invites you to turn the way you read upside down and see what falls out. Also chatting to Roger Kiyoko, who spent over 25 years as a senior executive on Madison Avenue. He worked on advertising campaigns for Advil, Kraft Foods and many others. His novel, The Brushy Ridge Militia, is a thriller about a school shooting that turns suburban parents into federal criminals. And finally, on tonight's book show is Caroline McGee. She's an award-winning journalist who was part of the launch team for The Independent on Sunday. Her debut novel, The Sitter, is a perfect evocation of late Victorian Norfolk, a fine-spun tale of love and learning in an age of seismic change. It weaves the key themes of women's rights, childhood memories, sexual freedom, religion, art and pornography around its compelling cast of characters. And that is tonight's book show on Talk Radio Europe.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Anne Morgan, an author, speaker and editor. In 2012, she set herself the challenge of reading a book from every country in a year, a project that led to a TED Talk and to the non-fiction book Reading the World, How I Read a Book from Every Country. She's with us on the book show to talk about her new book, Relearning to Read, Adventures in Not Knowing. It invites you to turn the way you read upside down and see what falls out. Drawing on an approach to reading developed over more than a decade of interactions with stories and book lovers around the world through the hit blog ayearofreadingtheworld.com, the book puts not knowing centre stage and plays with what examining the gaps in our understanding and the assumptions we use to plug them can teach us about ourselves and our world. Welcome to the book show, Anne.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. And before we talk about this new project, I have to ask you about Reading the World. What an exciting challenge to set yourself. How did you go about choosing the books?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, that was a whole thing. It was a life-changing thing, really. I mean, choosing the books was one of the many challenges I had to face because obviously some countries you had huge amounts of books to get through. I mean, India was perhaps the toughest choice that I had because there, 1.2 billion people, millions and millions of amazing stories, and people just suggested so many things. And every time I asked someone to help me choose, they would just suggest more books. But what happened there, and it was kind of what often happened, was someone would make a comment that would make me think about something. And in this case, it was a journalist in India. He said, oh, well, I see that everything that's been recommended is in English originally. And actually, that's second best to my mind to the many amazing books we've got in the 22 other official languages in this country and many other languages that are spoken beyond that. And so she said that her favourite author was a Malayalam writer called M.T. Vasudevan Nair, and I should go and find something by him. So often it was like a personal realisation or something that someone said that chimed with me, that pointed me in the right direction. But it wasn't an exact science. I don't think reading is an exact science. That's part of the joy and part of the challenge.
Yeah. So when you were reading something that had been written in a different language, presumably you were able to get a translated version, were you?
Yeah, well, in most cases, but the truth is that actually there were quite a few countries that didn't have literature available in English. And English is the world's most published language. It is at the moment, certainly the, kind of global lingua franca. But at the time of my quest, there were around 11 UN recognised nations that had no literature translated into English that I could buy. And so in those cases, I had to do all kinds of strange things to try and find books that I could read. And that often involved hassling people, emailing people and asking for recommendations and, trying to find things. People shared unpublished manuscripts with me. And in perhaps the most extraordinary case, a team of volunteers translated a collection of short stories specially for me from Sao Tome and Principe, the African island nation. And they were people I didn't know. One person I'd been at school with and hadn't been in touch with for years. He'd studied Portuguese at university, and then 8 strangers who heard about it on social media and volunteered to help. And one of them was a woman called Margaret Jules Costa, who translates Nobel Prize winners. She's one of the world's leading Portuguese and Spanish language translators. And she contacted me and said, I've heard what you're doing. I'd like to offer to help. And so I found a collection of short stories by a writer from the islands, and I got enough copies to send out, and they all stuck to their word and sent their translations back. So I had the entire collection to read within 6 weeks. And excitingly, actually, that collection is finally being published in English by a Canadian publisher this year. Margaret Jules Costa has edited it. And so that's really lovely to think that that's now permanently available for anyone else who's interested to read it.
Oh, that's amazing. How lovely that all these people contacted you and wanted to help.
Yeah, it really, I mean, to be honest with you, it's one of those things that even now, if I get weighed down by the state of the world and how bleak things can seem sometimes, I just think of that generosity, the excitement that people had about sharing stories and their willingness to go out of their way, not for any reward or any, anything special other than just to help me achieve this goal. And I think that is the really wonderful thing about storytelling. It has this power to bring us together. It's a universal human impulse. We all love sharing stories. We may do it in slightly different ways, and our stories may be slightly different, but we all love stories and what they can do. And that has, I think, huge hope and huge potential to bring us together in all our difference and difficulty across all kinds of divides.
Oh, absolutely. And you must have, along the way, discovered some authors who you really enjoyed and went on to read further books written by them.
Well, yeah, I mean, a number of authors whose work I love, but perhaps the most special for me is someone who has actually now become a friend, an extraordinary writer called Tete Michel Pomassi, who is from Togo. And he wrote a book called An African in Greenland, which is the true life story of him deciding to run away from home as a teenager in rural Togo, having had a run-in with a python that put him off snakes. He found a book about Greenland in his local evangelical bookshop and said, not only did this amazing country have no snakes, it had no trees in which they might hide. And so he decided to run away from home and go and live with the Inuit. And he travelled up through Africa and travelled through Europe and got a boat from Denmark. It took him around 10 years to do this. And in 1965, he arrived in Greenland and he wrote this extraordinary, joyful, warm and funny and surprising book about his experience there and his journey to get there, which I fell in love with, and I wrote about it. And when I wrote about it, I called him the writer that I would most like to meet, and not with no idea that I would ever meet him. But it so happened that we became friends when his book was re-released as a Penguin Modern Classic. And actually last month, his book is the subject of my new book, Relearning to Read, the final chapter about curiosity. I talk about him and how I'd like to go to Greenland with him. And this August, he and I travelled along the west coast of Greenland together, revisiting 60 years after his first visit to the country. We went back together, which was an incredible experience. He's just an extraordinary man. So what a joy, really.
Oh, yeah, absolutely fantastic. So how many countries, how many books did you read, and how long did it take when you started this?
The question, how many countries are there in the world? It sounds like it should have a simple answer, but any of us who watch the news will know that actually it's a bit more complicated. Not everyone agrees on what a country is. And so there are different lists, different numbers of countries. So at the time when I did my quest, there were 188 members of the World Bank. 205 countries had competed at the Olympic Games that summer, the 2012 Olympics in London. There were all kinds of different numbers. I think there were in the region of 283 national flags. But I ended up going with the list of UN recognised nations, but I added a couple of extra territories to reflect the fact that doesn't reflect everyone's views. So I added Taiwan, which used to be a UN member, and then I also added one extra territory, which people chose for me, to reflect the fact that there were lots of nations that weren't on that list. So that gave me a total of 197 books in total, which worked out to roughly 4 books a week, just slightly less than that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, in a year, and I was working 5 days a week, so it was quite a challenge. I had to be quite organised and work out exactly how much I had to read each day and stick to it in order to make sure that I wasn't going to get caught out. But actually, the reading was only half of it because obviously I was writing about each book on the blog, and I also had to source the books and choose them, and people, people did amazing things to help. So sometimes, because I would get up quite early before I had to leave to travel to work, I'd go to my computer and I'd find someone saying, "Oh, I've decided to research this country for you, and I found these things." Or people sent me messages saying, "Can I go to a bookshop in this country and post you something?" So I was really lucky. People just were, something about it caught their imagination, and that really cheered me on, I think, and kept me going. And I really, I was interested in it anyway for my own, interest, but actually knowing that all those people had invested in it and been interested and given their time and efforts to help me really did help focus the mind and keep me going on the days when I wasn't so in love with reading for hours a day. Yeah.
It makes you realise what a massive, passionate and enthusiastic book-loving community there is around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, and I've been so lucky over the years since to interact with lots of readers in different countries. I'll be going to Assam in India in February for the 4th time. There's a festival there that I work with, which is incredible, in this university in Assam. And the students there are so enthusiastic. They come in their thousands to hear the writers speak. I'll be going to Hong Kong in March as well to speak to a festival there, and just it's so heartening to see that enthusiasm, to see the joy that books bring. And something that's magical about stories, I think, is that they bring us, they give us common ground in that we can inhabit the same imaginary landscape. So even if we're from very different backgrounds or, very different walks of life or different views on many things, if we read the same story, for a short time, our minds move along the same imaginary tracks. And that means that we've sort of been on the same journey to an extent. And so there's a kind of shared ground there. There's a shared experience, which gives us something to start from. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. So that book is called Reading the World. And now I want to talk about relearning to read, Adventures in Not Knowing. So how did this one come about?
Yeah, well, this really came out of all the Reading the World experiences, because we talked about some of the logistical challenges that I had reading the world, in terms of the time and choosing books and working out what a country is and all that stuff. And that was tough. But actually more intimidating for me was realizing that the way that I had learnt to read wasn't going to work when I started to try and read the world, because I was someone who prided myself on being a good reader. I'd been an English literature student, and I'd always been very proud of saying clever things about books. And the way I knew how you read was that you did it by understanding everything and bringing knowledge to books. So you'd say, in Shakespeare's day, corn was threshed in this way, so this metaphor has all these implications and these resonances, and all that, it's really fascinating. It brings out all kinds of really interesting insights. And, none of this is to kind of do down academics or study. I think that's really valuable, and academics have been really helpful to me. But what I realized was that if you're going to really read the world, if you're really going to read internationally and widely. No matter who you are, no matter how many languages you speak or how many countries you've been to, there's going to come a point where you don't understand something. And for me, this was really thrown into kind of sharp focus that year because I was reading so quickly. I had 1.87 days for each book. I just didn't have time to do any more reading around. So if there was going to be something I didn't understand, there was no way I had time to research it. And certainly I had no time to do any contextual research about the societies or cultures that I was reading stories from. And many of them I knew nothing about. So I suddenly thought, oh God, what am I going to do? Because I'm going to look really stupid. There are going to be loads of things that are going to go over my head, loads of references I won't get. There'll be jokes that I won't understand. And maybe I won't even know if a story has a happy ending or something, because it might, the rituals and assumptions that are working and it might be so different to what I'm used to. And how am I going to deal with that? And so I realized the only choice I had was to hold my hands up and be honest about the fact that I wouldn't understand everything and that there might be some things that I got wrong. And that was a necessity at the time, but it turned out to be a revelation, because actually starting to be honest with myself about what I didn't understand and to pay attention to that and see where those gaps were, that opened up a whole new language, really, of understanding, reading myself better, learning about my conditioning and the things that I'd come to assume about stories or about how the world works, but also just exploring what that experience can teach us about reading in a really even wider sense than just books, reading situations, reading people, reading dynamics. I think because many of us can sometimes feel a bit ashamed about not knowing. It can seem like a weakness. At school, if you got the right answer, you get a tick, and that's good. And we don't like to admit often that we don't know. We're a bit ashamed sometimes. And so sometimes we hide when we don't understand from ourselves by telling ourselves, there's something wrong with this. It's bad. It's badly written. It's not for me. Because we don't actually want to face up to not understanding. But when you actually dig beneath that, there can be some really interesting insights to dig into about, maybe there's this, I can learn more about this, but also maybe won't always find the answer to something. You can't Google everything. You can't research everything. Maybe that's okay. And that in itself is an interesting experience. So relearning to read, it kind of brings all that together. And over the last few years, I've run these incomprehension workshops, I've been calling them, with readers around the world, looking at texts from different books that are likely to be outside the comfort zone of most readers. And, many people listening, I expect, at school will have done the comprehension exercises at school, where you get a chunk of text and you're asked questions about it. What does this word mean? Rewrite this sentence in other words, say what's going on here. And all that's very useful, but it carries that implication that there's one right way of reading, and that if you can't explain everything, you're failing. So what I do is I turn that upside down and I give people text that they're not going to understand, they're not going to have all the answers for. And rather than asking them to give answers, I'm asking them to ask questions. I don't understand what this means, or I'd like to know more about this. This intrigues me, or this offends me, or I'm unsure about this. This makes me uncomfortable. I'm surprised by this. And by paying attention to that, we start to play with, what does reading mean to us? How do we read? And how I read will be different to how you read. You'll bring different things to a book than I do. And that's really interesting. So each chapter in the book takes a different chunk of text and uses that to look at a different question. So it might be, what do you do if you don't know if something's funny? How does that feel? And that can be embarrassing, or how do you navigate that? What is good curiosity? That's Tete's chapter, as I was saying, Tete Michelle, who I went to Greenland with. Or what about if you're reading something written from a political perspective that you really don't agree with? How does that sit with you, and how do you deal with it? It's really the distillation of all that. And I hope it's a bit anarchic, a bit playful. It digs into my own biases and my own shortcomings quite deeply as well, because I think that's part of what you learn when you really read in that way.
Yeah. So did the project of reading the world really change the way that you read pretty much every book? since.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think one of the things I found really interesting about it is, I've always been an enthusiastic reader, and I love lots of British and American and other English language stories. That's still the case. I still enjoy reading those books. But I think certainly for me, having grown up in a world where I read widely, but within that framework, there were certain things that I assumed were universal. They were just how the world is or how stories work, that having read more widely and having learnt to be more comfortable with not knowing and to play with it, I started to see, well, no, that's just one way of looking at it. That's one answer. That's one perspective. And it's made me more alive to the richness and complexity of the world, but also sometimes to the stories that aren't being told, or the voices that may not be being heard in certain stories that maybe I wouldn't have noticed before.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I've spoken about the way people read before, and I know people who read really quickly, and they kind of explain it in a way that they're not necessarily analysing every word. They're almost skimming it, but they're still getting the story. And I find when I do that, I'm not really getting the story. I sometimes feel like I've read a few pages and then I go, what's just happened? What have I just read? Who did what? And then I have to go back. I am probably from the same school as you. You're used to reading and feeling like you need to understand what's going on at all times. And, if you're reading a book that's got loads of characters in, I can very easily think, hold on a sec, is that the uncle or the brother? And then I have to feel the need to flip back and try and find out the name of the brother and, that's the brother. Okay, perfect. And it can easily get confusing. So if I was doing it under any kind of deadline like you were, I'd feel really overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really understandable. I mean, I still struggle with the big Russian novels where you've got so many names and they have different naming conventions and you kind of get lost with, or even the Shakespeare history plays where the Earl of Gloucester dies and there's a new Earl of Gloucester and suddenly it's really confusing as to who's who. I mean, it is tricky. And we all read differently, don't we? And that's the joy. I mean, when I read a book, I'll get different things out of it to you. That's why book groups are interesting, because people won't have had entirely the same reading experience. I mean, I talked earlier about traveling the same landscape, but if two of us went for a walk together, we'd experience different things about that walk. You'd notice different things, or we might be feeling differently about it. So it's this kind of this shared experience, but also with your own individual slant on it. And that's what's so wonderful about it. That's what's such a joy, I think.
Yeah. Differences of opinion on characters. Yeah. You can read about a character and one person might think, oh, good for her. She should really go for it. And the other person could be like, what is she doing? She needs to stop doing that right now. And that will come from your own experiences, likely.
Absolutely. Because that's the thing. We project quite a lot onto the stories that we read. So, people will think, books are really full of details. But actually, if you look at how many details are on the page, it's not much. A good writer will leave lots of gaps that the reader can fill. And what's really interesting is if you're reading a book that's written from a cultural perspective that you're familiar with, you'll probably fill those gaps with roughly what the writer would expect or roughly what fits. But if you're reading a book that is from a very different world, you might plug those gaps with all kinds of things that don't really fit at all. And what you reach for when you don't understand something might be different to what I reach for. So I might reach for biblical references or fairy stories or cultural pop culture, or there'll be different things that, are closest to the surface for each of us. And that's one of the things that the incomprehension workshops show up, is what people, when they don't understand what they reach for. I had a really interesting experience running the workshop with some students in India, where I presented them with this chunk of text taken from a transcript of a griot, or a storyteller, a West African storyteller's performance that was recorded in the 80s. And it had been recorded on this creaky old tape recorder and then transcribed in the original language, Songhay, and then translated from the Songhay into French, and then translated from French into English. And the original recording had been quite poor quality, so there were missing bits and all kinds of things, and bits that said undecipherable. And these students reading it their take was, oh, this is the transcript of two spies discussing an assassination. And I was like, what? Something like that would never occur to me. But for them, the world they were in, the way they looked at life, that was close to the surface, that sort of thinking. And that's really interesting, learning, oh, okay, this is what I tend to default to when I don't understand something. This is what I tend to plug those gaps with. That's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a fascinating subject. I think people should definitely get a copy of Reading the World, as well as Relearning to Read, Adventures in Not Knowing. And that is available on our website, TRE.radio, by Anne Morgan, who we've been chatting with. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, little Alan Bennett here. If I'm not writing books, then the thing I like most is listening to the book club on Talk Radio Europe. Fancy.
Joining us on the line now is Roger Kioki, who spent over 25 years as a senior executive on Madison Avenue, working on advertising campaigns for Advil, Kraft Foods and many others. But throughout his life, he's had a passion for writing. He's with us on the book show to talk about his latest novel, The Brushy Ridge Militia. It's a thriller about a school shooting that turns suburban parents into federal criminals. Welcome to the book show, Roger.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you with us. So, dare I ask where this idea came from?
Well, that's a good question. For many years living here in the United States, starting in the 1990s with Columbine, there's been these school shootings. A disturbed, usually young male or males, go into a school and for no reason whatsoever, at least on the surface, they start spraying bullets. And so there was Columbine in the 90s. And then in 2012, I live in Connecticut, only a half hour away or so from Sandy Hook. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was home that day working from home, and I saw it on TV. I saw Obama come on the TV, and it was hurtful. And my daughter and I, 2 weeks later on Christmas Day, went up to Sandy Hook and left some flowers we bought. And then fast forward to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and in Florida, and I think another mass shooting. This was a high school. And I remember a couple of days after that, maybe 3 or 4, there was a big town hall community meeting. Everyone was there, almost the entire student body, the faculty, the 2 senators from Florida, the Congress people. Senator Rubio at the time was there. And after everybody spoke, there was a Q&A, and the history teacher got up, and she said, what militia was that young man part of, the shooter, obviously, and how is he well regulated? So it occurred to me that the Second Amendment that we have, which reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, was an ambiguous set of words. And, if you just read that to anyone, as I just did, what does it mean?
Yeah.
It was, but that being said, it is the framework for the U.S. gun regulation for about 250 years. So maybe those words could be used to prove a point. So the parents in this book, after going through all that, they lose 11 children and 1 teacher. After they go through all the stages of grief, they decide to lobby Washington for safer gun laws. And the Speaker of the House, who is owned by the gun lobby and also has control over what legislation gets to the floor of the House, he refuses to meet with them. They're outside his office holding pictures of their deceased children and loved ones, and he just walks right by. So when they get back to their town, and it's Brushy Ridge, Ohio, they decide that we're going to throw the Second Amendment on its side. we're going to go back to the original meaning, and we're going to form a militia, and we're going to take the Speaker of the House hostage in an act of civil disobedience and force him to watch security footage of the shooting and morgue photos of the victims until he agrees to bring better gun legislation to the floor of the House. So that's the premise, and that's sort of the crux of the story.
Wow. Wouldn't it be great if that actually happened?
Yeah, well, one of the points in the book is that America was, born based upon civil disobedience. A few guys got a little ticked off about a tax on tea from the king, and they started throwing boxes of tea off into Boston Harbor. And that is civil disobedience. I mean, Rosa Parks, was civil disobedience. She broke a law. She sat in the front of a bus. That was illegal, but she thought the law was bogus. So she committed an act of civil disobedience. So did Martin Luther King. And one of the themes of the book is that sometimes as a regular citizen, you hit a brick wall. No one will take action that has any power. And in this case, they decided to take action through civil disobedience.
Yeah.
And so, they ultimately get caught. Some of them go to jail, but it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And I'm not going to say what happens there, but I don't want to be a complete spoiler. But it's an interesting turn of events. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, great idea for a story. Did you have fun writing it, imagining how it could all work?
Well, yeah, writing the first draft was fun, but then I started working with a developmental editorial editor, and then it gets frustrating because they ask for change, or they suggest changes and changes and changes. And as a matter of fact, I was working with a literary agent in New York, who was seemingly going to take it on, but asked for so many changes. At one point, I just read it, and I said, no, I don't like this. And I went back to the original, the first draft, almost, and that has gotten great reviews.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, you need to be happy with your own work, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you don't want to compromise on things you don't want to compromise on,
Yeah.
And you have to be true to the idea. And if you just sell out for commercialism, you're probably not going to have as good a book as you wanted to at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be tricky, the editing process, I guess, because, if you agree with everything your editor says, then great. But if you don't, then there needs to be some discussion and compromise, doesn't there?
Yeah, and there was. I mean, but at a certain point, I just said, this is too much. So,
yeah.
So I went on, and luckily my gut was right. And it got editor's pick on Book Life, which is a big indie book website owned by Publishers Weekly. And it's gotten really great reviews. Every once in a while, there's an odd troll out there. But other than that, because of the subject, actually. But yeah, I mean, it's been very well received. The people who read it and get back to me are very, it's a different type of story.
Yeah.
If you really want to think about it, it's about people taking action on behalf of their loved ones. And in their estimations, their loved ones sort of trumps the law.
Yeah.
No pun intended, but
I mean, you'd hope and assume that most people feel like this, but of course they don't. It is a very controversial issue, both in America and the rest of the world. But obviously we're talking about America, the gun laws, and every time there is a school shooting or any kind of random shooting, people in America and the rest of the world are going, well, something needs to change. You know, something is fundamentally wrong to do with gun laws, presumably. You know, it doesn't happen in other parts of the world in the same way that it does in the US. And it's like, well, surely people can see that.
Well, Europe has about 1/3 per capita guns per person. And the homicide rate is much lower than in the U.S.
Yeah.
I think in the U.S. it's 5 to 6 people per 100,000. I think in the European Union, and I think I'm close on this, it's about 0.6 persons per 100,000 or 0.9. But there is, like, you don't have to be a genius in math to see that there's a correlation.
Yeah, for sure. I've never seen a gun. I'm in my mid-40s and I've never seen a gun. I've never known anyone who's had a gun, apart from some friends that live in the countryside that have rifles and go out clay pigeon shooting.
Well, I mean, there are responsible gun owners, right?
Of course.
And I mean, if you're a hunter, that's nothing that's ever appealed to me. But if it did, fine. I just go by the regulations.
Yeah.
I know people, good friends, who have like guns in their top bedside, desk drawer, because particularly if they're single, because if there's an intruder. But still, even though that's a really justifiable reason to have a gun, the statistics say that if you have a gun in your house, it's more likely to be used on yourself or a friend or loved one than an intruder. So you got to take that you got to take that into consideration, whether or not you want to have a firearm in your house.
Yeah.
But you have the right to defend yourself. There's no... and I'm sure it's the same in Europe too.
Well, not to have guns. I mean, it is very different. That's the point. That's why I'm saying I've never met anyone with a gun, because people don't have guns in their house in case there's an intruder. You have people might have a baseball bat, but again, I don't know anyone with that. I think people would go for a knife in their kitchen if need be. I mean, most people, don't have certainly guns or weapons in case there's an intruder. You just have to deal with it whatever way.
No, I see your point, and it's a much different social ethos, I guess, for lack of a better term. And Europeans have a different set of values, I suppose, from the U.S. The U.S., when they seceded or from UK. There was a lot of debate among the founders of this country about whether they should have a strong federal government or just strong state governments. And the Federalists, for a strong federal government, sort of won out. But in the compromise, they said, well, the citizens can have guns to form militias in the event that the federal government becomes tyrannical. Because in their opinion, one of the reasons they left the UK was King George was tyrannical. He was just throwing taxes at them to pay for things in the UK. So that was the basic compromise behind the Second Amendment. And these parents, they decided, well, it basically, the Second Amendment says we can form militias, so let's do it.
Yeah, love it. Well, it's a great idea for a story, and I'm glad it's getting good reviews. If people want to get a copy, it's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's called The Brushy Ridge Militia, and it's by Roger Kioki, who we've been chatting with today. Roger, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. That's my pleasure.
Talk Radio Europe, the book program. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Caroline McGee, a multi-award-winning journalist who was part of the launch team for The Independent on Sunday. She's with us on the book show to talk about her debut novel, The Sitter. It's a perfect evocation of late Victorian Norfolk, a fine spun tale of love and learning in an age of seismic change. Welcome to the book show, Caroline.
Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us. So how unbelievably different do you think it was writing a novel compared to all the journalism work you've done previously?
It was massively different because with journalism, it's all about the hierarchy of fact and it's about the deadlines. There's only so many ways you can write a story for a newspaper. And I wanted to do much more than that. I wanted to go into characters and I wanted to talk about the emotions that go on under the surface and how human beings impact on each other. So I stepped into the unknown and decided to try and write a novel.
Yeah. And even though with a novel you're essentially making things up, I know you did a massive amount of research for this book.
Yes, I did. I suppose because I was a journalist, but also because there was this extraordinary village near where I live in North Norfolk called Melton Constable. While I was driving through it, I realised that all these tiny little brick terraces were nothing to do with Norfolk. They weren't Norfolk vernacular. They weren't made out of flint. And this whole village had been put down in the middle of fields. And it was a phenomenon, really, because every single person who lived there worked on the railways. And every single house had people working on the railways and had to take in lodgers. And I started researching it. And, you know, every novelist needs a stroke of luck. And mine was to find a woman called Phyllis Youngman, who had gathered in when the railway stopped running in the sort of early 20th century and finally with the beaching cuts. She'd taken in lots of memorabilia. And she even had whole railway carriages in her garden.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and she had a ticket office and she was chair-bound. She couldn't walk, but she had amassed all this stuff and she was so keen for somebody to write about it. And, you know, again, a novelist needs a world to drop into. And this became my world and I peopled it with some really lovely characters and with trimmers and upholsterers and fitters and coal shifters and engineers and engine drivers and signalmen. And I sort of got the sound of the trains going again in my head because the village, I've renamed it Swanton Stoke so that I can imagine around it. So everything that happens there is invented, even though I've also woven in quite a lot of stories that I was told because Phyllis actually got in a lot of the descendants of the original railway families. They came round one night and they shared all their memories with me. So some of the little stories in there are from that night, which is, yes, it's, you can tell I'm terribly involved with it all. Yes.
Yes, lovely. And it must have been amazing for you to get so involved in something that you, I guess, didn't know much about before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then into this village, I had a friend actually where we lived in Hindringham, whose father had been a baker, worked in the bakery in Melton Constable, and he'd since become a very successful baker in his own right. And she told me all about his life. So I have a baker's son growing up in this railway village who's working, you know, there's the rhythm of the trains coming and going and the getting up of steam, the men going to work, doing very long hours. But then he has another rhythm, which is his father, who's a very strict Methodist. So there's prayer and Bible readings and getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning to light the oven, the making of the bread, taking the bread out on a hand cart, taking it around the village, and some villagers able to pay, but some are so hard up they can't. And then, of course, into this setting, I bring a very beautiful woman who steps off the train one night in a sort of cloud of steam, and she brings with her a broken heart and a cut hand and 2 dresses. And she's got on the train in London and said, take me to the end of the line. And of course, this is the end of the line because it's where all the railway maintenance is done. Mm-hmm. So she's a very odd, she sort of sticks out like a sore thumb. Mm-hmm. And gradually, the baker's boy, Jack Stamp, you know, he develops a crush on her and he starts to spy on her and watch her through from his little place in her back garden. He can beat a way through. And then he befriends her and he learns that adults aren't trustworthy and he becomes her messenger. So we have the setup there. But there are sort of quite serious underlying themes, which I don't think you really notice while you're reading it, but it's about the making of history, how we see things, what we note, how found objects tell us stories. And it's also about the disempowerment of women and the loss of innocence and the sometimes fine line between love and abuse. That's quite a strong part of it.
Gosh, a lot going into it. And were you conscious of that as you were writing? Did you want to include lots of different elements to it so it wasn't a straightforward linear story?
Yes, I wanted to do something difficult, and I didn't want it to be quite like anything else. I just wanted to carve a fresh path, really.
Yeah.
But actually, originally, I had a modern storyline and the Victorian storyline, and it just kept not working. Over years, I realized it didn't work. And then finally, I stripped out the modern storyline and just went with the early storyline, and it just came together. It just suddenly came together.
Yeah. And was it easy enough to find a lot of information as to what this particular area was like during Victorian times?
Well, I had the help from Phyllis Youngman, and I read round it a lot. I mean, for instance, the young Jack Stamp is set terrible dares by his friend Billy, and he does them. It's terrifying. But to find out what it was like to lie under a train while it went over you, I went to the Railway Museum at Swindon and lay under, there was an inspection pit under a steam train there. And
wow.
I went down into it and got a real sense of how terrifying it would have been.
Gosh, extremely noisy, I imagine.
Yeah, well, nobody should ever do it. Is all I can say. But also, the thing is that now, this actually strangely, I mean, it's the 200th anniversary of the first passenger train in Britain, so it's a nice year to publish this. But also, Melton Constable, the inspiration for my village, Swanton Stoke, has finally decided it wants to cherish its railway history. And so they are now gathering in all the memorabilia, and they're doing a lot of oral history. And they've got a grant from Historic England, and they're putting on a huge exhibition next year. And the women are sitting around making a kind of Bayeux tapestry of the railway history there. And so now it'd be much easier to research this book than it was when I did it.
I was going to say, you can probably help them.
Well, we have talked, we've talked, but it's about the people in the village finding out about their own village. So I'm an outsider in a sense.
Mm-hmm. And there's another part to the story with regards to Rosie escaping a secret past.
Yes, the whiff of scandal around Rosie. So there's the London leg of the story, which is that she was orphaned and became a seamstress. And it was a grueling life being a seamstress. And she realised that she had a real talent for drawing. So she visited a well-known cartoonist called Edward Stafford Clarke and asked for patronage. And he thought, oh, yum, yum, this beautiful woman. Yes, I'll certainly help her. But he had a very extraordinary way of working, which was to mock up. He was a cartoonist for Burlesque magazine, and he would mock up the scenes using his servants and Rosie once she'd joined in, and then photograph them and then make sketches from those photographs. So they're very laborious. Whereas here was this young woman who had just a natural talent. She could just draw. So they began to work together. He had a commission to do a sketch for a dinner invitation of the good and the great, and he thought it would be fun to represent them all as animals. So they set off to the zoo, London Zoo, which was in its early days, to make sketches. And of course, she was brilliant at it. But the zoo was at a very interesting stage because they were just discovering a lot about animal care. They were still the country was still getting used to the ideas that Darwin had given us. And they were bringing animals back from Africa and trying to classify them. And it was a marvellous place to put Edward and Rosie because they could leave behind all the rules of society. And this was their sort of Garden of Eden, really. And they're, of course, surrounded by nakedness because animals don't wear clothes. So it was a good place to put, as was the art world, because, for the sake of art, art is about perception and deception, isn't it? And for the sake of art, you break rules and you let your feelings out and you sometimes take your clothes off for the sake of art. So it was a good place to put them, to lead them on to what happened next.
Yes. And presumably writing this has inspired you to write more fiction. Is this the first of many novels?
I'm working on another, which is set on the marshes here in Norfolk. I'm about halfway through. It's set in sort of 2000, so it's historic, but not very historic. And it's about two girls from very different backgrounds growing up together and how the friendship survives.
Great. Well, in the meantime, if listeners want to get a copy of The Sitter, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Caroline McKee, who we've been chatting with. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks very much. Lovely to be with you.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
The TRE Bookshow is sponsored by audible.co.uk. Download one title each month, plus unlimited listening to thousands of Audible originals, podcasts and audiobooks. Just click on the Audible banner at www.tre.radio.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit TRE.radio.